When you build models for real-world problems, one of the most common realities you will face is that the thing you care about is rare. Fraud is rarer than normal purchases. Account takeover is rarer than normal logins. Critical outages are rarer than healthy uptime. And even in non-security domains, the positive outcome you want to predict may be the minority. Class imbalance is simply the situation where one class appears much more often than the other, and that imbalance can quietly mislead you at every stage of modeling. Beginners often celebrate high accuracy without realizing that a model can achieve that accuracy by almost never predicting the rare class at all. Handling imbalance, well, is not about forcing the data to look balanced for aesthetic reasons, but about aligning training and evaluation with the real cost of mistakes. If you learn the basic sampling strategies, understand the risks of SMOTE, and choose evaluation methods that reflect reality, you will stop being fooled by flattering metrics and start building models that behave responsibly. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A key idea to understand early is that class imbalance creates a mismatch between what looks good on average and what is useful for the decision you actually want to make. If 99% of your examples are normal and 1% are suspicious, a model that predicts normal every time gets 99% accuracy, yet it detects nothing. That is not a math trick. It is the natural outcome of measuring success with a metric that treats all examples equally when the decision impact is not equal. In cloud security workflows, missing the rare attack can be far more costly than incorrectly flagging a few benign events. But if you train and evaluate using an objective that is dominated by the majority class, the model will learn to optimize the wrong outcome. This is why imbalance is not just a data property. It is a behavioral pressure that pushes models toward the easy path. Handling imbalance, well, starts with acknowledging that the default training and default metrics are often misaligned with the job you want the model to do. Before you fix imbalance, you need to notice it clearly, and the most practical way to notice it is to look at class counts, and then translate those counts into what a naive model would do. If the minority class is extremely rare, the baseline strategy of predicting the majority class will look deceptively good under accuracy. That baseline is useful because it gives you a reality check. Any model you build should meaningfully improve on what you could do by ignoring the minority class. It also helps to think about the operational meaning of the base rate, because the base rate shapes how your model's outputs will be interpreted. In security settings, a low base rate means that even a small false positive rate can create many false alerts, simply because there are so many benign cases. That fact does not mean you should give up. It means you must manage the trade-offs deliberately. Class imbalance is a reminder that your modeling choices must connect to workflow capacity and decision cost, not just to training scores. Sampling strategies are the first family of tools people use, and they are best understood as ways of changing what the model sees during training so it pays attention to the minority class. Undersampling reduces the number of majority examples, which can make the dataset more balanced and training faster, but it risks throwing away useful information about normal behavior. Oversampling increases the number of minority examples, often by repeating them, which can help the model learn minority patterns, but can also encourage memorization of those repeated cases. The core idea is that sampling changes the effective training distribution, so it changes the incentives the model experiences. In cloud security data, this can be valuable because you often want the model to learn what differentiates rare malicious events from the overwhelming background of normal activity. At the same time, sampling can distort the apparent frequency of events, which means you must be careful when interpreting predicted probabilities later. Sampling helps the model learn, but it does not automatically make outputs calibrated to real-world rates. Undersampling sounds straightforward, but a thoughtful approach recognizes that majority data is often diverse and contains important boundary cases that protect you from false positives. If you remove too many majority examples, you may discard the very examples that look similar to attacks but are actually benign, and those examples are critical for learning a decision boundary that does not overreact. A naive undersampling strategy can also create unstable results because the model's performance will depend heavily on which majority examples you happen to keep. That instability is a sign that you are injecting randomness into the learning problem. In practice, if you choose undersampling, you want to preserve variety in the majority class, especially near the region where mistakes are likely. For beginners, the main lesson is that undersampling trades information for balance, and you should treat it as a controlled compromise rather than as a default. If the majority class contains multiple regimes, like different departments or different traffic patterns, careless undersampling can erase entire regimes. Oversampling by duplication has a different risk profile because it keeps all majority information but increases the influence of minority examples by repeating them. The benefit is that the model sees minority patterns more often and has more opportunities to adjust parameters in response to minority errors. The risk is that repetition can make the model memorize the specific minority instances, especially if they contain unique identifiers or rare combinations that will not repeat. In a security context, this can show up as a model that flags one known attack pattern very well, but fails on slightly different attacks because it learned a narrow fingerprint. Oversampling can also create the illusion of a larger dataset without adding new information, which means it can increase confidence without increasing true evidence. A responsible mindset is to treat simple oversampling as a way to rebalance training attention, not as a way to create new data. If you use it, you must still validate honestly and watch for signs that the model is overfitting to repeated minority cases. This is where synthetic minority oversampling technique, SMOTE, enters the conversation because it is designed to go beyond duplication by creating synthetic minority examples. The basic idea is that SMOTE picks minority points and creates new points along the line segments between a point and its neighbors, producing new examples that are similar but not identical. For beginners, the intuition is that it tries to fill in the space around minority examples so the model can learn a broader region rather than a set of isolated dots. This can help when the minority class is sparse and the model struggles to form a stable boundary. However, SMOTE is not magic, and it can create serious problems if you do not understand what it assumes about the feature space. It assumes that interpolating between minority examples produces plausible minority cases, which may be false when features are categorical, when constraints exist, or when minority examples represent fundamentally different subtypes. One major SMOTE risk is that synthetic points can cross into regions of the feature space that are actually majority territory, especially when classes overlap or when minority points are near the boundary. If you create synthetic minority points in a region where the majority class is common, you are effectively telling the model that those majority-like points are minority, which confuses learning and can increase false positives. This risk is amplified when the minority class contains multiple clusters, such as different attack families, because interpolating between clusters can create unrealistic hybrid examples that do not correspond to any real behavior. In cloud security data, where malicious activity can be a mix of very different tactics, this is a real concern because the space between tactics may be mostly benign behavior. Another risk is that SMOTE can create synthetic values that violate domain constraints, like fractional counts, impossible combinations, or unrealistic ratios. The safe takeaway is that SMOTE can help, but only when the feature space is continuous in a meaningful way and when interpolation creates plausible cases. Another SMOTE-related issue is leakage, and this is one of the most common ways beginners accidentally inflate performance. If you apply SMOTE before splitting the data, or if you generate synthetic points using information from the entire dataset and then evaluate on a test set that contains related synthetic points, you have created a situation where training and testing are no longer independent. The model can benefit from seeing near copies or interpolations of test examples during training, which makes evaluation look better than it should. Even when you split first, you must ensure SMOTE is applied only to the training portion and never to the validation or test portions. This is part of the broader rule that any data-driven transformation must be fit only on training data. In time-aware settings, the rule is even stricter. You must not generate synthetic examples that use future period information to augment earlier training periods. Handling imbalance well is inseparable from validation discipline, because the temptation to rebalance can accidentally open the door to subtle cheating. Sampling is not the only approach, and in many cases, changing the learning objective can be safer and more stable than changing the data distribution. Class weighting is a common strategy where mistakes on minority examples count more in the loss function, encouraging the model to pay attention without duplicating or synthesizing data. The intuition is that you are changing incentives rather than changing the dataset. This can preserve the diversity of the majority class while still discouraging the model from ignoring minority cases. It also avoids some of the geometric risks of SMOTE because you are not inventing new points. You are simply telling the model that minority errors are more costly. The downside is that weighting can lead to a more aggressive model that produces more false positives because it is being pushed to catch more minority cases. In cloud security workflows, this may be acceptable or even desirable if the investigation pipeline can handle it, but it still must be tuned based on operational capacity. The deeper lesson is that imbalanced solutions always trade off types of error, so you need a clear view of which errors are tolerable. Handling imbalance well also depends on evaluation choices, because evaluation is where many models appear to succeed while actually failing at the task you care about. Accuracy is often misleading under heavy imbalance, so you need metrics that focus on minority detection behavior. Precision tells you, among the cases you flagged as positive, how many were truly positive, which matters for controlling false alert volume. Recall tells you, among the truly positive cases, how many you caught, which matters for not missing threats. There is an inherent tension between precision and recall because catching more positives often increases false positives, and being very selective reduces false positives but misses more true cases. A common beginner misunderstanding is to chase one number without acknowledging the trade-off, which can lead to a model that is theoretically optimal under a metric but operationally unusable. In security contexts, this trade-off must be connected to triage capacity and risk appetite, because high recall with terrible precision can overwhelm analysts, and high precision with terrible recall can create a false sense of safety. It is also important to understand why receiver operating characteristic, ROC, curves and area under the curve, AUC, are often discussed, and why they can still be misleading if used alone. ROC-AUC measures how well the model ranks positives above negatives across all possible thresholds, which can be useful as a general separability measure. The problem is that ROC-AUC can look good even when the model's precision is poor at the thresholds you would realistically use, especially under extreme imbalance. In rare event problems, a small false positive rate can still produce many false positives in absolute count, and ROC-AUC does not directly communicate that operational burden. Precision recall curves, by contrast, focus more directly on the minority class performance and can be more informative when positives are rare. The broader point is that evaluation must reflect the decision context, not just a statistic that looks standard. If your workflow cannot tolerate a high volume of false alerts, you must evaluate precision at the recall levels you need, and you must treat threshold selection as part of system design. Threshold selection is where imbalance becomes concrete, because a model that outputs probabilities still needs a decision rule about when to label an example as positive. Under imbalance, the default threshold of 0.5 is often meaningless because the base rate may be far below 50%, and a well-calibrated model might rarely produce probabilities above 0.5 even for true positives. Beginners sometimes interpret that as the model being weak, when it may actually be reflecting reality. The right approach is to choose thresholds based on costs, such as the acceptable false positive volume per day and the minimum recall you need for safety. In cloud security, thresholds are often tuned to manage analyst workload, escalation rules, and severity tiers, which means you may use different thresholds for different contexts or segments. This is also why calibration matters, because if probabilities are not well calibrated, thresholding can become unstable and unpredictable. A responsible imbalance strategy considers not only training performance, but also how scores translate into actions under realistic rates. Finally, handling class imbalance responsibly means keeping your mental model anchored in what the data represents and what the system must do after the model makes a prediction. Sampling strategies, including undersampling, oversampling, and SMOTE, are tools for changing what the model learns from. But they come with risks of losing information, memorizing duplicates, inventing unrealistic cases, and creating leakage if applied carelessly. Objective-based strategies like class weighting change incentives without changing the dataset, but they still require careful tuning because they shift the balance between false positives and false negatives. Evaluation choices are not just reporting choices. They determine whether you can detect failure modes early, especially under imbalance where accuracy and even our ROC-AUC can be misleading. When you treat thresholds, calibration, and workflow capacity as part of the same design, imbalance stops being a frustrating obstacle and becomes a problem you can manage deliberately. The real goal is not to make the dataset look balanced, but to make the model behave appropriately in an imbalanced world, where rare events matter and mistakes have unequal costs.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.